Good morning. If you're just joining us, as everybody is jumping on, we'll be starting in about 1 or 2 minutes. Make yourself comfortable. Good morning. Again, if you're just jumping on, we're going to start in 1 minute. So get comfortable and get ready for some exciting baking. Good morning, everyone. Welcome on this wonderful Sunday morning. It's chilly outside, but it's warm in all of our kitchens as we get ready to start the KM Isaiah Israel Challah Story. I'm Andy Kirshner. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at KM Isaiah Israel, and I'm delighted to be the host for today's event. We have a number of wonderful bakers who are going to walk us through the different steps to making challah. If you brought ingredients with you, that's great. We might be moving at a faster pace than you can keep up, but this event is being recorded, so you'll be able to refer back to it later. I know some of you let me know you were going to bring dough because you really just want to get your hands tactile in this event. And that's fine too. When we get to the braiding section, feel free to braid along. But again, everything's recorded today, so you can go back if you miss a tip or a piece, and you'll be able to access everything that way. In addition to a recording of today's event, we'll also make sure we send out a variety of recipes. Becky Rubin, one of our bakers today, is going to be following a recipe that she uses when she bakes challah. However, in putting together this event, we found all our bakers have different recipes that they love and enjoy, and so we'll share some of those as part of the follow-up to this program and event. I want to just start off by saying thank you to our bakers, Paula Golden, Becky Rubin, Julie Volchenboum, Arielle Hirschfeld, Jessi Allender, and Rebecca Barr, who are going to be showing and demonstrating all of their talents today. I also want to give a shout out to Cassie Bay, our new development coordinator, who's helping on the tech today. So thanks in advance to Cassie for just making sure we can all be heard and seen. And I also want to acknowledge Debbie Green, who is working behind the scenes on this event and helped us kind of create and also make sure we look very, very good today as well. This is an event that's been several months in the making. It came to our attention that challah is something that's near and dear to the hearts of many of the people in our community, because it connects to our Jewish tradition in such a big way. It also happens that Well, I work at KMSA Israel. In my volunteer time, I'm on the board of a fabulous organization called Challah for Hunger, which if you don't know much about it, you'll get to learn about today from Rebecca, who's the executive director there. And so we thought, what a great opportunity to merge our Jewish values with our social justice values and make a difference today at this event. So that's what we'll be doing. At the same time, more than just sharing about challah, because anybody could watch a YouTube video on how to bake and make challah, we wanted to make sure we also highlighted the important stories and connections that each of our bakers has to challah. So we'll be sharing that as well. You probably will have questions for these bakers too, whether you've been making challah for years, your entire life, or maybe you've never even mixed anything before. You might have questions. So I'm going to encourage you as we go along to put those questions in our chat. We're such a large group today, that will be the easiest way to get them out there, and I'll do my best to watch that, and we'll ask them as we go. And then at the very end, if you're willing to stick around for an extra few minutes, we'll take everybody off mute so you can ask a few live questions too. Our bakers have graciously agreed to stay on a little bit past noon to get some of those questions going. I already actually see in the chat some chit chat going on around everybody's favorite challah flavor. So keep that going and building that challah community in the chat as well as we go. So a little bit about challah. I mean, the tradition of actually baking challah in Judaism actually goes back to the Bible. In the book of Numbers, there's actually a verse that talks about taking of the challah, where when the Jewish people, the Israelites, would come to the land of Israel, they would bake the bread from the wheat they grow there. And one of the important obligations was to take a piece of the bread and you save it for the priestly class. And that's where the term challah comes from. And as it evolves over the years, different pieces of the tradition weave in and out that some of our bakers will tell you about. But one thing that I thought was particularly interesting to me is the first Shabbat that the Jewish people observe is, at least according to the Torah, so like biblically, is after they come out of Egypt, and eventually God provides this special manna. And it said that enough was provided on Fridays that they would collect 2 portions, and they would have one for Friday, one for Saturday, so that they wouldn't have to do the work of collecting the manna from heaven on the Sabbath, on Shabbat. And so for that reason, we put 2 challahs, as some traditions hold, on your table, one for that double portion. And a traditional challah is made with 3 strands. So a braid that has 3 strands. And if you put 3 and 3 together, you get 6 days of the week coming together, braiding together to make the beauty of Shabbat. Because Shabbat in itself is a beautiful mitzvah and something to uphold, but it's all the more sweet by the work that we put in the rest of the week to warrant that break from our everyday. And so I found, as I was, I guess, getting older and wanting to start a family, that tradition of sitting down to the table, eating challah, saying the blessings over the wine, lighting candles together as a family was going to be something that I really wanted for my family when at such time I'd be lucky enough to have one. And when I was dating the woman who's now my wife, she wasn't Jewish, so that wasn't something that she grew up longing for or wanting or even thinking about as someone who wasn't a part of the Jewish tradition. And she also made it clear to me that for her, Judaism wasn't a path for her. She wasn't planning to convert. And I had to think critically about what was most important to me as someone who was very interested in probably marrying this woman. And after a lot of contemplation and thought, I realized that what was most important to me was that Jewish home, creating a space for my someday family to come together, sit around a table, eat challah, say the blessings, and engage in a tradition of thousands of years old. And so I said to her that I could marry her and I'd fully accept her as someone in my family who wasn't Jewish, provided she could be a partner for me to build this Jewish home together. And she said she'd be willing to do that. And so some time went by and I came home one day and she said, on a Friday afternoon, she said, I need you to stay out of the kitchen for a little while. I've got a surprise. And I said, great. And after about, I'd like to think it was a few hours, but it was probably like 10 minutes because I'm not very patient. I found my way into the kitchen, and there she was baking challah for the first time in her life. My wife, at the time, my girlfriend, had looked up a recipe online to find out how to bake this bread that would be an important part of a tradition that we hoped would be a part of our family. And it was at that moment that I realized that she understood what it meant to be a partner to me. So that actual recipe, literally the piece of paper she printed out, is the same recipe we still pull out when we bake challah most Fridays. And now we have two beautiful children. If they're up for it, you might meet them at the end of this show. They're age 6 and 4, and they bake challah with us too, as well, using that very same recipe. So that's been really my strongest connection to challah is, because of challah, I chose to marry my wife, and because of challah, we really center our family Jewish rituals around Shabbat and the time that we eat it. So with that, I want to turn this over to two of our bakers. I'm going to introduce, Paula is going to speak first, but I want to first just mention Becky and Paula are doing the section on mixing our ingredients. And Becky, among other things at our synagogue, plays a role as co-chair of our caring committee, and first learned to bake challah with Paula Golden at a KM Isaiah Israel event. So I'll let Becky talk more about that. Paula actually joined KAM more than 50 years ago before it merged with Isaiah Israel to become KM Isaiah Israel. And that actually is a part of her story of when she started to bake challah. So Paula, why don't you tell us what's next?
Okay, good. Good morning, everybody. I think I have a lot of family visiting. Well, I grew up actually without challah. We had a Jewish family, a small Jewish family in the community in southern suburbs. And I never heard the word challah, I don't think. There was some special bread. It was called egg bread or twist or something, but the word challah escaped me. And I never took Hebrew in Hebrew school early on because we didn't, it was a small community. So I grew up with not so much Shabbat until I had my children, married Sam, and he'd grown up in a home that maybe observed more than I did. He certainly knew challah by the name challah. But anyway, so much for that. And so this is a quick summary. So in 1970, 71, we had belonged to KAM Temple, and there was a merger with Isaiah Israel. And my husband at that time was president, and it was very involved in the merger. But one of the conditions on the merger was KAM had a kitchen and a nice community hall, and Isaiah had an old house, and it had to be torn down. So the condition was they would build a new chapel, but a new kitchen and community hall. So with the fancy new kitchen, of course, they really studied and tried to make a really beautiful kitchen. Enter my mother, who in the small suburban community led baking groups, decided to lead a group of bakers in this beautiful new kitchen. This is about 73, 74, 75, up till 80 or so. And this baking group made all sorts of cakes and goodies and use yeast. And I had never used I baked, but I never used yeast. And I decided to go a different way and make challah. And that's when I started making challah. I found a recipe and I found it fun to do. And then a friend of mine, a Japanese friend of mine, sent me a New York Times recipe, Mrs. So-and-so's challah recipe. And that's where my challah recipe came. And I've been making challah ever since. And it's spread around. Sam ran a music program at Sleepy Hollow Resort, and on Friday nights we celebrated the Jewish Sabbath, and I made a huge challah for the 9 cups recipe, and we did that. The program went for 50 years. The 50 years was 2019, and I was still making the Sleepy Hollow challah, was called. And my first grandson at 6, started baking challah. One day I gave him the recipe and he made it, and his parents came down. And my Chinese granddaughter-in-law is also making challah up a storm. So you make decisions to do what you do, and I made a decision to make challah, and you can study these things. Maybe it's a little complex, but I've enjoyed making challah, and my family has enjoyed making my extended family, and others. So it's fun to be here. And if you have any questions later, I'm always available for questions. Just call me up.
Yeah. Paula, I'm just noticing somebody in the chat noted that their mother didn't make challah, but their mother-in-law did. So their son says, until recently, they called it nana bread, connecting it not to the tradition, but to the fact that grandma made it, nana bread.
Oh, that's
sounds like
interesting.
your grandkids are making challah because of you as well.
My retarded daughter, Anne, who died 10 years ago, called it Kala's challah, which was pretty interesting. She couldn't say my name, Paula, but she loved Kala's challah, as do my great-grandchildren and everybody. So that's the way it is. Fun. Everybody do it.
Becky, you've got a whole bunch of ingredients in front of you. Show us a little bit about some techniques to mix it up well. Oh yeah, make sure you unmute yourself too.
I am forever grateful to Paula for that she learned how to make challah, because then she taught me how to make challah. And even though I come from a long line of excellent Jewish bakers, and we would have weekly homemade Shabbat dinners, we had store-bought challah. It's just something that we didn't do. So when 3 years ago, when the caring committee decided that we were going to make challah, I was so excited to learn. You know, can I be spotlighted?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cassie, take Paula and me down so we can get a closer look at Becky's ingredients.
Right.
Oh, there I am.
That's great. That's my favorite.
If you are here today because you have never made challah and you want to learn how, it can seem very daunting and intimidating, but I am here to tell you that you've got it. Let me assure you, I know how it feels. 3 years ago, even though I'm a very accomplished baker, I had never made challah, and the prospect seemed quite overwhelming. But trust and calm, you've got this, I promise you. Making challah is not an exact science. In fact, it's a very exciting experiment. I often think that making challah is very much like being Jewish. It's a lifelong learning process, and it is open to interpretation. And not everyone does it the same exact way, and you have to find what works for you. And if it doesn't work, there's always next Friday. You can try again. Challah is a very forgiving bread, and it's open to a wide interpretation, and it's pretty much always delicious. You just have to see what works for you. If you have made challah, but you are here for some tips, you are also in the right place, because we have a lot of accomplished bakers and everyone has their own little spin. So what I am telling you is what works for me. But it might be someone else might be thinking, that's not how I do it. Oh, I do it this way. So I'm putting a little asterisk. This is how I do it. Others make delicious challah very differently. When you are baking, it is important to clear your surface, get out all of your ingredients and all of your measuring tools. You don't want to have to stop with sticky hands to find something. When you're baking, typically we think of ingredients in terms of the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients. In my recipe, the dry ingredients are active dry yeast, kosher salt, bread flour, and sugar. For my dry ingredients, my wet ingredients, I have non-GMO canola oil, eggs, water, and honey. You also need to have all of your measuring tools available. Because I bake a lot, I actually have some kind of non-standard tools that help me, such as a 2-cup measuring cup. I also have a 2 tablespoon measure, but you can use whatever you've got. So let's get started. The very first thing that you'll need to do is to proof your yeast. You'll need half a cup of water. Every recipe I saw said warm water. In the beginning, I was very nervous about what exactly was warm. And I saw on the back of the packet that it said 95 to 110 degrees. So there was a while where I did use my thermometer to make sure the water was just right. But now I'm a little more confident as to what warm feels like. So you put your warm water into a bowl. 2 packets of dry yeast. Sprinkle, sprinkle, give it a little stir to help it dissolve, scrape along the sides, making sure you get all the yeast. It has a nice yeasty smell to it. Then you add 1 tablespoon of sugar. This helps to activate the yeast. Dump it in.
Becky, I'm noticing someone's just confirming that's fast-acting yeast. Is that the term for it?
This is actually active yeast. It's not rapid rise. It's just regular active yeast. So there is a difference. It's just regular active yeast, not rapid. Now that I have my 2 packets and my 1 tablespoon of sugar, I'm going to place my yeast and let it rise. And I'm going to get started with my dry ingredients. Get the biggest bowl you could find. This is the bowl that I love to use. I use it every time. My recipe calls for 7 cups of flour. There is a wide variety of how much flour people use. I like to use King Arthur bread flour. Some people use all-purpose flour. Some people use whole wheat flour. I use King Arthur bread flour, 7 cups. Because I make challah a lot and I don't want to always measure the 7 cups, I do have a handy dandy kitchen scale. I put my bowl on my scale, I zero it out, and for me it's 2 pounds, 5 ounces of flour. So I've got my flour. The next thing of my dry ingredient, 3/4 of a cup of sugar. And I am lucky to have a cup that is 3/4. I pour it in. Stir it up. Then I put in 2 teaspoons, and this is a 2 teaspoon measuring of my kosher salt. Stir it up. Now my dry ingredients are all stirred. I am ready for my wet ingredients. My recipe calls for 3 eggs. I use room temperature eggs. That's just what I do when I'm baking. I already have 2 cracked. I use my pastry cutter, crack my egg, have my whisk, just give it a gentle go.
Becky, I happen to know that, your day job is you're an art teacher, right? An artist.
Preschool teacher.
Or preschool, right? But I mean, so much of what I know about you is like creating art with children. And I'm curious, like, how much of this is science for you and how much is art, right? Because baking is like a scientific experiment.
It is. Well, and that, before I made challah, it was intimidating to me because many of the recipes for cakes, it has to be exact. And I assume that that's what's the case with challah. It is not the case. I have 10 different challah recipes, not one of them is the same. Yeah. I talked to excellent bakers who produce fabulous challahs. None of us do it exactly the same. It is a very flexible dough. Recipe, you can lower your anxiety. It's gonna come out. It just really does. I know people use 4 eggs, 5 eggs, only use egg yolks, use the whole egg. I don't know, it still tastes delicious. So you don't have to be so scared. So I have my 3 eggs, 3/4 of a cup of oil. In goes my oil.
Your nephew, Matt, is cheering you on right now, by the way.
2 tablespoons.
Becky is the best.
2 tablespoons of honey. Give my wet ingredients a little stir. So now I have my wet ingredients. I have my dry ingredients. And look at this. My yeast has puffed. Very nice. I gotta be honest, like a cooking show, I had one already puffed. My one is not puffed. So this is how I do it. Others do it differently. I put in my puffed yeast. I put in my egg, honey, and oil. Get it all. I typically use 1 hand for mixing, 1 hand for turning my bowl. I do mix, mix,
So you're
mix.
just you're in there with your hands, right? From
I'm
the
just
start.
in there with my hands. Some people use a bread machine or a stand, the mixing stand.
Yeah.
I like to do it by hand. It's very relaxing and meditative for me. As a preschool teacher, I like Play-Doh. I like the sand table, so I don't mind getting my hands dirty. So now it's pretty gently mixed, but there is some loose flour. The recipe I use says 1.25 cups of water. Start slowly. You might not use a whole 1.25 cups. I've noticed that depending on the temperature in my kitchen, sometimes the season, if it's very dry in the winter, you might need more water. If it's very humid in the summer, maybe less. Better to start slowly. Pour in some water. I give it another spin and spin, trying to get up all the flour. I still see a lot of bright white spots where there's dry flour. Put in some more water. Try to get the parts that are still dry. Sometimes I move the part that looks very well sticky already so I can expose the driest part. I can tell already that my kitchen is dry today and I am probably going to end up using the whole 1.25 cups. Some days I don't. And that is also the fun thing about challah being like an experiment. I have made over 500 challah. Every time it's maybe a little bit different. And just when you think you've got it, something, who knows? Something is different that day. But it always gets eaten. Even if I burn it, you cut off the bottom. And I'm mixing, gathering up any dry bits. One last.
In the chat, Becky, some people are saying in addition to the recipe, we need to send a link to where you get that amazing giant bowl.
This giant bowl I inherited from my mom, Mama Addie, who is been my first and best teacher of baking, who learned from her mom, my Nana Mosh, who learned from her mom, my buddy Anna. So, and I am blessed to have married into a family of fabulous bakers, including my mother-in-law, Paulette. So here it is. It is well, it's about ready to be skinned, the official kneading, which I am going to turn over to my friend Jessi, who's going to walk us through the kneading process. I am happy for questions later.
Yeah.
But don't be scared. You've got this. You've got it. It's easier than you think.
You make it look easy, Becky, but I can tell from experience, the more you do it, the easier it gets. Let's go over to Jessi, who Cassie's going to do some Zoom magic to unspotlight Becky and show us Jessi Allender.
Hello, everybody. I've got my dough here. Hopefully you can see it pretty soon. Just waiting to see if there we go. So I've got my dough mixed together. I only make a 2 cup of flour challah dough for my family of 3. So it's much smaller than what Becky has. And I use these dough knives to get it. But I have my dough together. All the ingredients are in and it's ready to turn out onto a floured surface. I also do it, I saw somebody in the chat mention that they do it the other way, where they take all of their liquid and then add the flour as needed. And that's my process. So not all my flour is in yet. This is my second cup of flour, and sometimes it takes it all, and sometimes it doesn't, depending on how humid it is or what type of flour I'm using. So here's my dough, and I'm squishing it out flat. It's still really soft and sticky, so I'm still using my bread knives. It's probably going to take it all. So I'm Jessi, and I'm a member of KAM Isaiah Israel. My family has been members since, I think it's since about 2012, but that's me and my family, my kids. But I also grew up at KAM, and my parents became members at KAM Isaiah Israel, I believe right around 1970 or 1971. And so I think I was in some of those classes that Paula was talking about. And I think I remember my first times making challah in that wonderful kitchen, which we still have, but I always want to use it more. And I can't wait till after COVID, maybe we can get in there and do this live and in person.
Oh, that would be amazing, Jessi.
Right.
Wouldn't it? So, and also professionally, I'm a registered dietitian, and I used to cook for a living. So I'm not much of a baker, but and pre-COVID, like it was like twice a year that I would make challah at home. But since COVID, it's been a regular habit. I made it once on you know, I even like put it up on YouTube the way I make it, because I wanted to remember how I do it, because I think like Becky said, it's different every time. My flour today is my challah today needs 1.5 cups of flour. So here's a little bit more. But I'm kneading it by hand, which, like others have said, it's a very meditative process. And the method I use, I relate it to pastry making, croissant making, or puff pastry making specifically, because what I do is I flatten it out, I fold it in thirds, and I start over. And that helps to build layers. And the process of kneading, the whole point of it is to build what everybody else is so afraid of, gluten. Gluten is the protein in the flours, and it's made when you mix flour and water together. Two separate smaller proteins, one's called glutenin and the other one's called gliadin, come together to form gluten. And gluten is a really strong, intensely bonded protein that can trap the CO2 gas that the yeast makes when it eats up the sugar in the flour. So our yeast is making CO2, and we need to trap it in some sort of structure in order to get a nice fluffy bread with great texture. The more you knead it, what's the question?
Why is the kneading seems to be, it's not just about mixing it up better, it's about making it rise better.
Yeah, it's both. So you both want to get a even mix and all your flour worked in, but you want your gluten to get developed, get strong, and get so it's in there. One thing I was also going to talk about is what kind of flour. I usually use all-purpose flour. There's different kinds of flour out there. So for the novice baker, you might go to the store and be totally overwhelmed by pastry flour and cake flour and bread flour and all-purpose flour. And the difference between the flours is how much protein is in them. So cake flour has the least, and bread flour, and also semolina flour, which we use to make pasta, those have the most percentage of protein or gluten fibers. And so the stronger you want your bread to be, the more gluten you want to have in it. So the higher protein content you want to choose. And so many people that bake a lot of bread swear by using bread flour.
Yeah. Jessi,
and as registered,
I'm noticing someone's curious, as your technique looks flawless, by the way, so you're doing great. Someone's asking,
thank you.
They're looking for advice to how do you knead without causing the breaks in the dough? They used to work at a pizza place, and they would struggled a bit with that part.
So you want to pay attention to the elasticity. And you may have been using at a pizza place, I'm going to assume that they were using a very high protein flour, but you don't want to push, like if you push the dough beyond, like I don't want to be super aggressive with it. I want to follow its elasticity, because if I go too strong on it, it'll start breaking. And that usually happens when I roll it. When I'm done, I roll it into a ball to put it in my, and that's when I'll see it. And it doesn't matter too much in the long run, but you do want to kind of respect the length of your protein fibers inside the dough. You know, a lot of people, I grew up kneading in a different way, which I'll also show you. My grandmother and my mother taught me to knead, and my nanny Jan taught me to knead with one hand, where you pull, let me see the camera, you pull over, you do it this way, pull over and push in, and then push out. I need a little more flour. Oh, there's some in the cup.
Yeah, I think somebody else is saying that's the way they do it, using the heel of their hand.
Using the heel of the hand.
Turn, repeat.
And because I want to have only just enough flour, because I feel that makes a more tender bread, and doesn't that I want to keep it just a little bit sticky. And so I like using this method where I flatten it and roll it.
Is that where those pastry scrapers come in, because it's a little sticky?
That's where those pastry scrapers come in, exactly.
Yeah. Somebody
and then
is curious, well, how do I know when I'm ready to stop kneading? I know we're not going to do all the kneading.
The fifth time you make challah, you're going to know exactly when that is. You want it to feel giving, elastic, and the kind of sticky where it doesn't leave dough on your hands. So right now it's still leaving, where's the camera? Get so backwards. Anyway, it's leaving film on my hands. And when it's ready, it won't do that anymore. And then I also wanted to say that if you choose to do this in the machine, like if you're doing 7 cups, you want to use in a stand mixer bowl, you want to use the dough hook, because that's what's going to be the best thing for mixing, for kneading dough. And you can let it go. You can just let it go in your mixer, and go take care of other things, for 10 minutes. You can just let it go in the mixer on very low. You want to, like, on a 2 or a 3, maybe a 4. But you don't need it to go fast. You just need to keep building that tension. And also, I think that bread machines, they do the first parts of this as well. For a long time, before these lockdown days, I really struggled with working full time and with the kids and other responsibilities. Like, when do you make dough? Like right now, what I'm going to do with this dough is I'm going to prove it and braid it, and then I'm going to freeze it before the second rise, so that I can bake it next Friday. You could also freeze it at this point and then let it rise. And that's one thing I used to do. I used to buy dough through Akiva Schechter from North Shore Bakery, I think. And that was, a way to just have the dough ready to go, and then I could just let it rise and braid it, which we're going to get to next.
That seems like a really helpful, I've got a lot to do during the week, but I could do my dough on Sunday, and then
you can do
Friday
your dough
afternoon to finish up
the week ahead. So here we go. It's stopping. It's no longer putting any kind of film on my hands. It's not sticky anymore. And then I just wanted to go back to the flour bit quickly, and the choice of flour. As a registered dietitian, for the most part, I made challah from whole wheat because I just got to. And my kids, they prefer the white flour. They've told me that point blank. So sometimes I do it 50-50. Sometimes I do it 25-75 split between the flours. The whole wheat dough is definitely a lot softer. It doesn't build as much gluten, and it doesn't, you know, it tends to have a tighter crumb, which is like when you slice the bread, how many holes it has in it. A whole wheat bread doesn't have as many, it doesn't have any like big cavernous holes that you get like in sourdough. And it doesn't even have the smaller things that you get in this one. But I'll tell a funny story that when I was a kid, we almost always for Friday night dinner at home, for Shabbat dinner at home, it was almost always store-bought challah. Occasionally we would make challah at home. But one thing my sister and I would always do is just reach in and get avoid the crust and get the bread and squish it into a square and mush it up and eat it. And, you know, I didn't want my kids doing that, but lo and behold, they learned how to do that all on their own. And they just take the white part out from the middle and squish it up into a square. Yeah, I'm being criticized for telling that story off camera here.
Some other people are saying they also did that trick growing up too. Right.
Awesome. So yeah. There is some kneaded dough, and I'm going to finish. This is the part where I see it usually rip a little bit, but I roll it into a ball, and I take out a bowl that it's going to rise in. I put a little bit of olive oil in it, and then to save my hands from getting all olive oiled, I put the ball in, and I roll it around and flip it over so the bowl and the dough are covered in oil. I cover my bowl tightly with plastic wrap that didn't there we go. So I cover that really tightly to keep it warm and secure inside there. And then I cover it with a kitchen towel. And I put it on top of my refrigerator because that is the warmest spot in my kitchen. So it can rise and double at least.
Thanks, Jessi. By the way, Jessi not only bakes challah on YouTube, but cooks a whole mess of things on Nutrition Connection, right? That's your YouTube channel?
Yeah,
so check that out too. And somebody asked, I think I caught it right. If you want to do the freezer technique, you braid it and then it goes in the freezer, right? And then
you can freeze at a couple different points and really have a lovely challah when you reheat. So you could take this dough and not rise it, wrap it tightly in plastic, throw it in the refrigerator, in the freezer, and keep it until you want to use it. And then you'd need to let it rise twice. You do the initial rise, punch it down, braid it, raise it, and bake it. You can also do it from here where you go all the way through the first rise and shape it into a braid and then freeze it before the second rise. And then you take it out, braid it, put it on a tray, let it rise, just like the frozen croissants from Trader Joe's, one of my favorites. You can just put it out overnight or take it out before you go to work in the morning on Friday. Leave it on the counter covered in plastic and let it rise all day, already braided. And when you get home, it's 10 minutes in a 350-degree oven.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jessi. We're going to switch over to two other fabulous bakers who are master braiders. Julie Volchenboum is a member of our board of directors and leading our diversity, equity, inclusion committee as well. Arielle Hirschfeld, among other things, is a mom, a doctor, a musician, a volunteer in KMIZ Israel, so doing quite a bit herself. They're gonna, with some video technology, show us some of their best braiding tips. So Arielle, I think you're gonna take us first, right?
Yes, thank you so much for the introduction. We are so happy to be here. I'm here with my baking assistant. This is Yasha. He's a big fan of some of the other bakers here, including Becky, who's also his teacher. So we made a dough this morning too. So Yasha's gonna help us with taking the challah. Tell them a little bit about why we do that, why we take off the piece of dough.
Because we make a sacrifice one time and pour it into.
Very good. So Yasha's gonna show us how we say the blessing.
Adonai Elohim Leham Asher Kitzah Benetota
the half reach. Amen. And then we put it in our tin foil. And then what do? We put it in the oven to burn. So we do this before we start shaping our challah, and it reminds us of the priestly offering, as Andy referenced.
Of the sacrifice.
Right, and of the sacrifices we used to give when the temple was still there.
Oh, and then came the Star Wars.
Yes. So at this point, if we can switch to the video of the two braiding shapes that I have, then I'm going to tell you a little bit about how those braids are formed. So in this video, you're going to see me shaping the dough into balls. And I have a little bit of a maybe persnickety version of dough shaping that I do. But there are many different ways to do this. As Becky said too, don't be intimidated by challah baking. It's really, it all works out great. It's delicious. So I'm shaping them into rounds.
I hear.
It's okay, you can hear me. And so what you'll see here is that I actually at some point decide that these balls are not the right size. And that's totally fine. You know, we all make these little blips, and it's fine. Here I am pinching off a piece of dough, estimating the size of the balls. As Julia Child says, never apologize. It all works out great. So the
So
reason
that
I
little
wanted,
snip is you're just evening out balls right there.
yeah, I just decided that ball was too big. I pinched off a piece and I tucked it under another one. So, you know, estimation works. You can be more scientific if you want to, or you can just estimate. And I wanted to include challah, Yasha in our challah story, because Yasha is a big part of what makes challah special for our family. So every single Friday for a couple of years now, we've been baking challah together. He helps me take the challah. He makes his own loaf. So that becomes our second loaf, so that we can say the blessing. And it's a really, really special part of our Shabbat tradition. So especially because we add chocolate chips to the dough, which definitely incentivizes the process for him. And it really is a central part of how we celebrate Shabbat and hold space for that Friday night meal in our family. So here I am in the video shaping the dough balls into these sort of mini baguettes. You'll see I put the flats.
Some chocolate dip.
Of course you can put in chocolate chips. we will be shaping some dough together later, and I'll have dough to answer questions at the end, which is what Yash is referencing. So you put the smooth side from the top actually surface down, and then you flatten it with your hands, roll it, and then pinch the seam closed, put the seam side down on the table. You don't have to do this. It's a little bit more work. I prefer to, because the process of shaping it this way and giving the dough a little bit time to rest makes the elastic of the protein relax a little bit, and it's a little bit easier to roll out without it tearing. So this is part of, and you can see me here rolling it out.
So it almost looks like, Arielle, you're going from balls to sausages, and now you're doing the strands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this part you'll see, this part actually takes longer than the braiding itself. So again, you can feel free to omit this and just take your chunks of dough and roll them straight out. I just like this because of my, as a perfectionist issues. And then also because it gives the dough time to relax, because I don't like it when I braid a challah and it looks perfect and I put it in the oven after proofing and it's sort of like the dough strands tear. So this is one way that I've found actually really prevents that from happening, especially if you have a little bit more time to let them rest. And you'll see me gradually shaping them, giving time for the protein to relax and become a little bit less elastic so that they don't tear as I shape them. And here I am rolling them using this part of your hand, sort of your fingers and knuckles here to, not knuckles, but the other side, the palmar surface, to roll out the strands so that they're the length that you want. And then I'm going to be showing you guys two really easy braids. Julie is in charge of the more complicated, though she will make it seem easy, the more complicated braid. But this is a great way if you're trying to shape your dough in a hurry, or you're trying to shape your dough with the help of a child or other person, that you can really do it without a lot of thought. So I'm going to show you a long 2-piece braid. It's actually sort of a variation on a high 4-piece braid for those of you who know what that means. And then this right here is the very easiest, one of my very favorite shapes. This is a 4-piece round braid. So for this braid, all you do is you take your 4 strands and then you sort of weave them together. So you'll see that there's,
What's that?
you'll see
What's
that,
that?
you'll
That
see,
doesn't make sense. There's another mama.
I know there's another mama, it's me. So this way I'm going, basically I'm just taking the strands and then crossing them over first in one direction and then back again in the other direction. And then you do this, I've done this about 3 times. So clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise again. And then you'll see me really just tuck all the strands underneath into a giant blob. And it sounds kind of messy, but it looks really beautiful. And it's very easy. It's great for the high holidays when you're trying to make that round challah. So I really love that. That was the 4 strand.
And my understanding is nobody sees the bottom part. So you just smush it out. That ugly part gets smushed under.
It's behind the scenes. It's totally fine.
Mama, I'm going to do it.
We'll do it with Yasha's anxious for chocolate chips. So here I'm going to show you a two-piece high braid. So it's really a 4-piece high braid. It's just that I'm folding the strands over so I don't have to pinch the ends under on 2 ends. Again, the perfectionist side of me. And what I love about this too is since I'm taking more time to shape each strand, this cuts down on that time too. So I really love the 2-piece braid here. You'll need strands that are a little bit longer, but you can decide. You can decide if you want a shorter, fatter challah, you'll make the strands shorter, or if you want a longer challah. And so you'll roll them out a little bit longer. So basically you make sort of 2 upside down V's and you lay one on top of the other. And then I say a mantra, sort of a mantra to myself here. So far right to the middle, and then second to the left to the middle, and then far left to the middle, second to the right, over to the middle, far right to the middle. And you keep doing it. Second to the left, all the way over. Sorry, I messed that up. All the way left to the middle, second to the right, all the way over. Far right to the middle, second to the left, all the way over, to the left, to the middle. And once you get used to this rhythm, it actually becomes very easy. And here I am, I'm just sort of, again, kind of fudging the ends here, braid them together, pinch them, put them underneath, and give it a little roll to sort of make it that nice, even shape. And it really doesn't take much time.
And I'm going to remind people who are trying to follow along at home, this is recorded, so they'll get to see this again when they get the link for the recording.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll have Doe too if people have questions or if they want to see things again or see certain parts of that, I can always answer questions at the end.
Love it. And I'll also mention the rabbi put in the chat a note about the tradition of taking challah and some of the requirements. And I also shared a source sheet from our cantor who did a Torah study on that very topic. So I'll share that with everybody at the end too, so you can learn more about that lovely tradition and the blessing that Arielle said as well. So let's go to Julie, who's set up a lovely rainbow situation to show us some different kinds of braids. Hi, Julie. Tell us about your tradition on baking challah, and we'll get braiding too.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. This is fun. Oh, I thought that I got rid of the echo here. Let's see. I'm going to put my phone away. So I have a video of a 6 braid challah that we're not going to show quite yet with rainbow. Like each strand is a different color. And it was quite an ordeal to do that. I actually had to put all the components of the dough, like imagine what Becky showed you. And I had 6 separate bowls. One was red, so that was a big project. But hopefully it will help you see what I'm doing with the dough. My story about challah is that I attended a congregation where someone brought a gigantic loaf with 6 braids to our Oneg Shabbat on Fridays every week. And it was the most amazing thing I'd ever tasted. I did not grow up knowing anything about challah. And I was determined to make that. And I got his recipe, which was a photocopy from a book. And also there were photos of braids, and it took me years actually before I learned the pattern. I was watching strand number 4. I mean, it was really tedious, but I learned the pattern, and it's so much easier to teach. And I hope that when you watch this first video of the rainbow challah with the exception of a little goof that I made that I correct at the end, you can see it's really not impossible. And you can make some amazing looking loaves with what Arielle showed you, and also this way. And of course you can always just use 3 strands and have a nice looking loaf. So any questions before we start? Anything major, Andy?
Let's throw that video up and let you get into it.
Yeah, okay. All right, so here I am with the magic rainbow strands. And I have not been trained professionally like Jessi and Arielle, so I just go for it. I go straight from the ball and I just roll it into strands. It might not be as smooth, but you know, still tastes good, right?
Also, you're gonna braid all 6 of these into one, right? This is a 6-strand braid. Okay.
Also having 4 kids and sometimes a dog in the house, I just try to get it done. So I roll them. The way the dough comes out, normally I don't need a lot of flour, but I do keep flour on my surface close by in case the dough gets sticky, as you can see in the corner. And by the way, what I did this morning was, I should just tell you what I'm doing here.
Yeah, somebody's noting this could be considered pride challah.
Exactly.
Great challah to bake in the middle of June.
I pinch together, and then the main point is you keep 2 hands. Watch my left. Okay, I'm still organizing them. I'm making a little bit of space. So I move my hands together, and the one on the outside goes all the way over. I kept my hand on the red one, and I put it in between the 4 that are laying on the counter. So now I put it all the way to the right. The other hand goes in the middle of the 4 that are on the counter. I know it's a little fast, but once you realize that you move your hands parallel to each other, I'm going to keep my fingers on the blue one on the left and just keep rotating. So it's like your hands are dancing, moving smoothly left to right. And you continue that pattern of moving the one in your outer hand all the way over and the other one to the middle of the 4 braids that are still sitting. And there, I tucked that orange one under because I twisted them over in a way that I didn't like in the beginning. But similar to what Arielle showed you, you can smush it and stretch it and tuck ends underneath to make it look more symmetrical when you're done.
Yeah, you're in the chat. Your mom is vouching for the deliciousness of your challah. You should know.
That's sweet. My recipe came from. I started out with a recipe that Alan Atribin, the gentleman in Minnesota, made, and then I went to some other challah classes and basically made a hybrid of a couple of recipes and added my own twist so that I do save my own recipe, which is online too. So
it sounds like your sister is. Your whole family's chiming in with how delicious your challah is. I'm amazed at your story that you tried this challah for the first time on Shabbat in this congregation, and then you just decided you had to make this for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did, I just learned and made mistakes in the kitchen on my own, and used to, for many years, baked every Shabbat, but then got busier.
Fantastic. I have the privilege to jump over as we're wrapping things up. Once the challah is braided, typically most people do what's called a second proof. I do with my recipe, where we kind of set it out for a little bit of time before it goes in the oven, sometime between usually 20 to 25 minutes, sometimes a little longer, sometimes a little less, depending on your recipe. And then it goes in the oven. So Rebecca Barr is going to join us now. Rebecca actually is not a member of KMSA Israel. She doesn't even live in Chicago. She's in Philadelphia, where Challah for Hunger has their offices. But it's a national organization doing amazing work to combat food insecurity, both on college campuses and around the world, really. I happen to be wearing 2 hats today. I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning, but in addition to working at KMSA Israel, I also serve on the board of Challah for Hunger. So I get to work closely with Rebecca as their leader. We've worked closely for the last year together, and she's a fabulous challah baker, a fabulous leader in the Jewish nonprofit world. and makes a great challah herself. So she's gonna get us through egg washing and getting it in the oven, and also tell us a little bit about the organization. And if you weren't here at the very beginning, I can't thank everybody's generosity enough as someone who's both a member of the community and a member of the Challah for Hunger community. This event has raised already over $1,200 to support the organization. From all the people that are here, watching us bake today. So that's lovely and wonderful and much appreciated. And we hope to learn a little bit more about Challah for Hunger and putting the challah in the oven before we go. So Rebecca, go right ahead.
Great. Thank you, Andy, and really thank you to everyone, all of our bakers and everyone who's here. I'm so thrilled to be with you this morning. It's just been wonderful to hear all the stories of all of our presenters. So yes, I am the executive director of Challah for Hunger. We are a national nonprofit. We serve college and university campuses and communities across the country. And we bring people together for community, philanthropy, and advocacy in one program. I will talk more about that in a minute, though, because we have to put our egg wash on our challah and get it ready for the oven. So you'll see I just did a 3-strand braid, and it's already on my pan. So I have flour on the bottom of my pan. Some people oil the bottom, some people put oil and flour. As we've heard all day today, there's plenty of ways to make challah, and we're going to see that now. Challah for Hunger actually uses a vegan recipe, which doesn't have any eggs in it at all. And you can do other things other than an egg wash. I make a loaf for my family that has eggs in it. So we are gonna have the egg wash, which is just 1 egg yolk and a little bit of water. And I whisk it with a fork. You can use a small whisk. And then this is your brush. So this is actually a silicone brush, but if you have a bristle brush, that's fine too. I've actually been in places where I've made challah and not had to brush at all, and I've just used my finger, also fine. So while we talk, I'm gonna put the egg wash on the bread, and then
You're using a whole egg there, right? Not just the yolk?
I'm using just the yolk and a little bit of water.
That's your technique, yeah.
Yeah.
And I can say personally, somebody asked it in the chat, I just use an egg and don't even add water because it's just simpler that way. But yeah, you're probably going to find yours is a little shinier than mine.
Right. And that's why you do some kind of wash. So there's actually a bunch of YouTube videos or blogs online of what to top your challah with. So some people use eggs, some people use honey. You can use butter. And then you just kind of want to get it in all the little nooks and crannies. And then we top our bread. You don't have to put anything on it, but I've got a couple of little options here. So I've got just, some sort of classic sesame seeds. I've got everything but the bagel seasoning. And then we also have cinnamon sugar. So I'm just going to do standard sesame, and you can use it right out of the shaker if that's how you get it. I wanted to put it in a bowl so everybody could sort of see it. So, and I'm being very liberal and not too precious about it. So then what you're going to want to do, I bake mine at 375 for between 23 and 30 minutes. Sometimes it's a little longer. Oftentimes I'll check it halfway through and see how it's browning if I need to turn it. But we earlier today heard 350 for 10 minutes. And so there's lots of different options here that we can do. So it will go in the oven. And then when it's done, you can take it out. Now this is, I did put everything but the bagel on here. So it's not apples to apples comparing sesame seeds to each other, but this loaf is done. And there's a couple of different ways to tell if it's done. So I mentioned the checking for a really even golden color all the way around. So this one I actually did turn halfway through. And then when you take it off, this is really my preferred method. I like to tap the bottom and just kind of listen to see if it's hollow. If it feels a little heavy, you might want to put it back in a little bit. You could use an oven thermometer. I mean, a cooking thermometer. I don't have one of those, so I don't do that. But that's definitely also an option. And then the last thing I wanted to note is that it's going to keep cooking after you are done. And so you want to let the bread cook outside of the oven for at least an hour before you cut into it. And if you are making it on a Friday, it will still be plenty warm, even if you let it rest for an hour. And we have some people in the chat already saying, you know, very important to let it cool. So I'd love to just tell you a little bit about Challah for Hunger. I know we have a couple of minutes left, and then we'll have some questions. But we at Challah for Hunger like to say we're not just baking challah, we really are baking a difference. So the Torah constructed a series of safeguards to combat hunger within the agricultural society of the Israelites. It said, if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If she's thirsty, give her water to drink. Not only do we bake challah with our chapters on a regular basis when we could get together and bake, and then sell the challah in communities across the US, but the proceeds of our challah sales go toward both local nonprofits like food banks and campus food pantries, and our national philanthropic partner, Swipe Out Hunger. They focus on creating meal swipe donation programs on college campuses nationwide. Challah for Hunger started just over 17 years ago, and we've grown to more than 80 campus and community chapters of individuals coming together to bake with each other, learn about the power of collective philanthropy, and advocate for those most vulnerable on college campuses, students who are food insecure. As early as January of last year, 39% of four-year students were food insecure. That means that they weren't sure where their next meal was coming from, and they might have to choose between food and textbooks, or food and the bus back to their apartment rather than sleeping in the library. With the pandemic, we now know that numbers jump to 3 out of 5 students experiencing basic needs insecurities, including food and housing. So in our combination of community building, collective philanthropy, and local and national advocacy, we really focus on leadership development, equipping our participants with the tools and resources they need to be active citizens in our world. When we stopped baking in March because of COVID, we really leaned into virtual community building like these bakes and our advocacy work. We launched our first national advocacy campaign that focuses on both state and federal actions to help food insecure college students. I think rather than sharing a personal story about challah, I'd love to share a story of one of our students. Monica Sager is a senior at Clark University, and she created a podcast which sources student stories around food insecurity, as told by those students around the country. Monica has been involved with Challah for Hunger since her freshman year, and I'm going to read a quote that she has because I think it really speaks for itself. She says, "Challah for Hunger means so much to me. I joined my freshman year and immediately felt the importance of the work we were doing. I became a cohort member my sophomore year, and I worked and advocated to make a food aid plan on my campus to provide students who are food insecure with 5 meals a week." She's very proud to say the project was confirmed to move forward even in the pandemic. I learned tools of communication, team building, and of course, advocacy to get to this goal. These lessons will absolutely help me throughout my journalism career. Since joining Challah for Hunger, I've participated, been in the cohort, become a mentor, worked with staff on giving talks around our advocacy campaign over the summer, given a presentation at our virtual convention, and now started the Campus Hunger Project podcast. My chapter didn't do advocacy too much when I first joined and solely focused on baking. Challah for Hunger goes far beyond that, and I wanted to help people see how we can make a difference even while we're apart with our advocacy and virtual opportunities. Challah for Hunger has given me so many opportunities, and the work we've all been able to do makes an obvious difference that is both amazing and meaningful. I really couldn't have said that better myself. So I would love for all of you to check out the podcast. The episodes are pretty short and they're so impactful. I have a link that I think Andy is going to share afterwards, as well as some other ways that you could all be a part of the Challah for Hunger network. Because we're not baking in person, but we all still love to bake, we at Challah for Hunger do have an opportunity to purchase challah kits through us. There was a time in the pandemic where it was really difficult to get flour or yeast or a lot of the ingredients because everyone was baking bread. So we developed this as a way to still connect to our campuses and our communities. The proceeds of those challah kits do go to our collective philanthropy that fights food insecurity. We have a number of opportunities for live virtual bakes with participants from around the country, as well as various pre-recorded videos to follow along with on your own time. In addition to our campus chapters, we also have a thriving community of families in all their forms around the country who participate in our community programming called Challah After School. We send out a monthly newsletter with an activity card that has a combination of live and offline activities that you can complete and share with your broader community. I've got links for the challah kits and the landing page for Challah After School that you guys will also get a little bit later as a follow-up too, along with all the amazing recipes that the bakers have sent. And we really, again, we always welcome support and donations to our local and national philanthropic efforts. I want to say a specific thank you to all of you who made a contribution to Challah for Hunger with this event. Combating hunger is one of the noblest things an individual can do. A story is told when you're asked in the world to come, what was your work? And you answer, I fed the hungry. You'll be told, this is the gate of the Lord. Enter into it, you who have fed the hungry. And you all did that today. I hope we'll be able to stay in touch and make a difference in person really soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I think oh good, it's back to me already. That was amazing. I'm always inspired by the work of this organization. I'm glad you're there to lead it. I saw in the chat people excited to hear about it, and we'll definitely share out those links with everybody afterwards about how to learn more about Challah for Hunger, how to get a challah kit where all the ingredients, I understand, get delivered to your home and you just have to put them together in your kitchen, and how to get involved in other ways as well. We are really at the end point. I think the last thing to do is make sure we take a chance to eat some challah, right? Try it out. So I made a point to make some challah in advance and thought I'd just model like the most important part of making challah, which is actually putting it in your mouth and trying it out. So I'm doing that. Oh, this is really good. This is really, really good. But while I'm doing that, I would love to let people take themselves off mute. So Cassie, change that setting. And if people have questions for our bakers, why don't we spotlight all our bakers and everybody, as you can see, some other challah eaters are coming into my kitchen. And so spotlight all our bakers. And those of you, if you have questions, you can continue to put them in the chat, or here, take some. You can put them, yeah, share with your brother. You can put them in the chat or ask them, because you can unmute yourself now. Hey, I have to say one more announcement, okay? My last thing I just want to share is one question came up as Rebecca was talking about when do you mix in chocolate chips? So Arielle, you were going to do that. Maybe we could start there and then take it from there. But if you need to get to your dough or the rest of your day, we thank you so much for being a part of this program. And we thank you for being a part of this program and invite you to other KMISA Israel events by tuning into our website. You'll find this Shabbat is particularly good weekend to join us because we have a special program that's musical with our cantor and dozens of musicians and cantors from around the country for Shabbat Shira, the song, the Shabbat for the Song of the Sea. And also in a really wonderful Shabbat learning opportunity on Saturday. So more on that in emails to come. For now, Arielle, why don't you tell us a little bit about baking and putting chocolate chips and other things in? When do you do it?
So we started with dough that had been kneaded and then left to rise the first time. And then Yasha added chocolate chips at that point. So he added chocolate chips and then now he's working on shaping his dough or braiding it or whatever he chooses to do. We give him full freedom there. Yeah, so that's when you can do it. You can also, I think Rebecca can say something too. They do this cool technique where they actually fold mix-ins into the strands, I think. Is that right?
Yep. So we'll make our long snakes and then we'll sort of flatten them out and then put mix-ins right in the middle. And then we fold it up and do a little sort of pinch and roll motion. Last week I made a challah that was fig jam and za'atar. So you put the fig jam and sprinkle za'atar right inside the strand and then pinch it up and then braid that.
Oh.
What did Rosalie want to ask? Are you there, Rosalie?
I need some mix.
Yeah, I love challah, except that I have celiac, and so consequently, I am gluten-free. I found a flour called Cup for Cup, and I have used it for anything.
Gorgeous, honey. Just gorgeous.
But I don't think, like, if I make a challah, will it come out? Because every challah I've tasted tastes crummy. Even when I go to deflour and buy a challah. Does anybody have, Jessica, I guess you might know the most.
Doesn't work with cup for cup.
If I need to get a gluten-free, Jess or anybody.
I don't know.
Am I literally doomed never to have challah?
I'm definitely not an expert. I'm not a registered dietitian, but I have played around with gluten-free flours. And I found that they don't really roll out and braid so well. And so they get really crumbly. So a lot of
I basically do the same thing where I flatten it all the way out and
Do you put the gum in it or whatever? There's some sort of gum.
So what I found works really well is they have challah, braided challah loaf pans. It's not as fun as—
I know, I have it, it's plastic, right.
So you can do that and you know, play around with the wet ingredients a little bit so it's not so crumbly. So you can get it close, but you can't do the rolling and the braiding as far as with the gluten-free, at least that Cup for Cup, or I think there's a couple other like all-in-one gluten-free flours. Again, I am not the expert, but.
And I heard Paula Golden was asking about, is it xanthan gum, right? Is something you can add that helps? Paula?
No, I'm in the same problem because I would like to make it good.
And I think Jessi's trying to chime in, but her internet connection is a little spotty. But maybe we've got her back now. We don't, but I'll tell you what, I'll ask her after and we'll send out some tips on gluten-free.
yeah, it's
Because the
well, and so I don't because I find it gluten-free flours
So
are
frustrating that you can't hear.
gluten-free flours are very short. They don't have gluten. That's what holds in. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, sorry, Jessi. I think your connection is a little warbly. So we're only picking up some. Why don't we, while you're trying to get it back, why don't we go to another question from somebody else? If there are other questions that have come up throughout. Well, I'm not seeing a lot of people rush to ask. It's a bigger group. It's intimidating. I'm seeing Yasha is demonstrating the important technique of sampling the chocolate chips before you braid them in. That is critical too. So, friends, I just want to say thank you so much. Thanks again to Julie, Paula, Arielle, Becky, Rebecca, Jessi.
Can you hear me now?
And Debbie.
Yes.
Oh, Jessi, you're back. Yeah.
Yes.
I switched over. So I'll just go back to it real quick. I know we were just about to sign off, but the gluten-free flour by definition, Rosalie, doesn't make gluten, doesn't hold in CO2 really well. So to make something braidable is a little bit out of reach. And I'm gluten-free also, and I love making challah, so they get to eat it. So you can also make challah and, give it away as, to join in the practice. Because I know there's always a need for challah. People love having a freshly baked one, and then I love the idea of making it look like challah in like a braided pan where it's a mold, and then you can make a dough. I like to make doughs with beans and bananas, and then some oat flour, and it's got a lot of structure to it, and so it's got a nice bite to it and holds butter nicely.
That's interesting.
Okay. If I use just cup for cup and I fooled around and just put it in a mold, it would have some kind of taste to it. I mean, usually they're so crummy.
Yeah, the gluten-free flours are crumbly. They don't hold up. That's one of the things I like to do is adding the beans because it adds so much structure.
It's not very good.
What
but we can talk offline, Rosalie. I'll call you.
Great.
I'm sensing that this event needs a second follow-up for advanced braiding, gluten-free techniques, how to really get in there. So, hey, if you really enjoyed staying here today, we'll stay tuned. Maybe come spring, we'll do a follow-up on Zoom or, hey, Ellie. And hopefully by this time next year, this event will be live and in person. Thank you everyone for coming again. Have a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful week, and happy baking.
This was wonderful.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.